You'd think, you would think that maybe we would learn lessons from history on this. Unfortunately, we don't seem to be doing that. Um, Obviously, last night we learned um that our worst fears had really come true. If you've been watching my channel for any length of time, you know I've talked about this. I've talked about this everywhere I possibly can. That one of the worst case scenarios we could see happening for Ukraine is that Trump and Putin walk into a room, carve up Ukraine, and then Ukraine is put in a position of you have to accept that deal. And that seems to be what is happening. And I will admit, I've said earlier, literally just a couple of weeks, in fact, last week, I'd hoped, given some of the stuff that Trump had been saying about Ukraine, how he didn't realize how difficult actually this whole conflict was, that he was going to end up following the Biden plan. So it's sort of, maybe our worst fears weren't going to come true. However, no, that unfortunately now seems to happen. And we don't know what exactly deal is gonna get cut here. Um, I think we're gonna have to tackle what Pete Hegseth said in a separate video, because it needs to be tackled honestly in a separate video, because what Pete Hegseth said, the US Defense Secretary, has a ton of ramifications for Europe in itself. But they plainly pretty much said Ukraine is losing territory. What Ukraine gets out of this, we don't know, but this is not going to end well. You've got a country in Russia that has violated the Budapest Memorandum. They've violated Minsk 1, they've violated Minsk 2, and that's just with Ukraine. You look at Chechnya, they violated ceasefire agreements with Chechnya, they violated agreements with Chechnya, they've violated agreements with Georgia, they've violated ceasefire agreements with Georgia as well. Just recent history shows you cannot trust Russia. Like, you just cannot trust Russia. And you'd think, after obviously the infamous moment where Neville Chamberlain comes back with this piece of paper, giving away, the Sudetenland without, so much as a buy or leave by, of course, at the time, Czechoslovakia, not even involved in that conversation. You'd think maybe we'd have learned after that. But you can only go back and look at the newspapers back from that time from Czechoslovakia. And they're all like, well, we had to give up this land for peace, and we hope that's right. We hope that, this, our worst case scenario, doesn't happen. But of course, well, we all know what happened, and we all know what that led to. Like, we all know what that led to. So let's get into Trump's comments on this, because this is just insane. So this is what he tweeted out on his Truth Social. So I just had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. We discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the power of the dollar, and various other subjects. I'm sure that phone call was riveting. And please, if that call was recorded, please someone release it. Please someone release it. However, that's probably the most troubling one there. Ukraine, but also the Middle East. Is Trump now going to insist that Syria keeps that Russian base, that Russian naval base? because I'll tell you now, the Syrians aren't too enthused about keeping the Russians in their country. But now it looks like Trump will now put pressure on Syria to force them to keep that naval base. That looks bad. That looks incredibly bad on this. Anyway, he truthed on. We both reflected on the great history of our nations, the fact that we fought so successfully together in World War II, remembering that Russia lost tens of millions of people, and likewise, we lost so many. Who cares? Who cares about this shared history when right now Russia is doing exactly what the guy you fought against them with was doing? You know, he is taking and annexing territory by force. We agreed after that war that an international order should be set up so that this type of thing can never happen again. So, as a lot of people have said very recently, the international order, the post-war World War II international order, gone. The world is now suddenly a much more dangerous place because of that. Anyway, truthed on, he continued. We each talked about, of course, the strength of our respective nations, the great benefit that we will someday have in working together. So that right there shows, to me at least, or makes me worry, that the US will undo the sanctions on Russia. Remember, those sanctions that we have on Russia, ultimately right now, crippling its economy, are one of the best ways to make sure they follow any peace deal that gets done, even this ridiculous one that Trump might be about to do. So that is worrying, that he's instantly like, oh yeah, we can work together. Work together on what? Carving up Ukraine? Taking Greenland? Um, you know, it raises so many alarm bells, and it gets even worse when probably the next video will cover what Pete Hegseth said and the implications of that. But, oh boy. Anyway, but first, as we both agree, we want to stop the millions of deaths now taking place in this war with Russia and Ukraine. Well, who started this war? It was Russia who started this war, not Ukraine. The person most responsible for those deaths was the person he was speaking to. And then it gets even more really worrying because you can see right now Putin manipulating Trump. Like, straight up, this next sentence proves Putin knows how to manipulate Trump, that he is going to manipulate him in these negotiations. So he said, President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense. Oh, but you know, Mr. Trump, it's just common sense that we have this territory. It's just common sense that we occupy the rest of Ukraine. It's just common sense that they disarm their country, leaving it open to further invasions. It's just common sense that they're not in NATO, opening them up to a further future invasion. And I will tell you this now. I will tell you this now. If I was Zelensky, the first thing I would be doing is making sure whatever this deal gets called, it is called the Trump deal. Tie it to Trump in every way you possibly can, because eventually this will fail. Russia will break it. And when they break it, that is Trump's failure. It's his name all over it. And here's the thing. Trump loves slapping his name on things. So when it eventually fails, maybe he'll realize he got taken and played for a fool. But I doubt it. That is a very sincere hope, but I very much doubt it. We both believe very strongly in it. We agree that we need to work together very closely, including now visiting each other's nations. Why? That is incredibly worrying for Ukraine, because that shows their willingness to essentially cut you out of any deal. That the deal is going to be between Russia and the US, and Ukraine ain't going to get a say in it. And I will say this now: I'm very glad our defense secretary has come out very strongly. Not only just ours, but 7 other, I believe, at this moment, other countries in Europe have come out and said there can be no deal if Ukraine is not part of the deal. I think that is a very strong message to send. I think that is a very strong message to send. But we now have to, as Europe, really consider contingency plans. Like, what should we do if this deal basically gives Putin everything he wants? Do you think Zelensky is going to agree to it? He might not. Then what? We have to now be very seriously considering a lot of contingency plans. So he continues, we have also agreed that to have our now respective teams start negotiations immediately. And we will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation, something which I will be doing right now. I've also asked Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of the CIA John Radcliffe, National Secretary Advisor Michael Waltz, and the Ambassador and the Special Envoy Steve Woodcock to lead the negotiations. Why is America leading these negotiations? It should not be America leading these negotiations. It should be Ukraine. I have been very, very adamant on this right from the beginning. Any negotiations that happen, it is Ukraine that leads on them, and we are only there as like, with our sunglasses on, doing, I don't know, some, dope ass thing to basically back up Ukraine and basically say he speaks for us. I worry now, because just as we saw in 1938, handing over this land was meant to stop a wider conflict in Europe. That didn't stop a wider conflict in Europe from escalating. And if you give Putin everything he wants on here, what's to stop him not only again doing this again to Ukraine, but also, as we get on to the worrying comments of Pete Hegseth, what's to stop him doing this to another country, basically to test to see if they are really serious about Article 5? Because there was a lot of people saying that, thanks to Pete Hegseth, Article 5 died this year. It died on the 12th of February, 2025. Article 5 is dead. And that undermines NATO as an alliance structure. But we'll get onto that in the next video, because there's so much to talk about that itself in that other video. I feel very strongly that we will be successful. Millions of people have died in a war that would not have happened if I were president. It would have absolutely happened if he was president. This delusion he lives under is ridiculous. But it did happen, so it must end. No more lives should be lost. What about all those lives lost by the Ukrainians defending their homes? It's a massive betrayal. This is a betrayal on a level I feared about, and fortunately it looks like it's going to happen. because this will have all kinds of consequences for Ukraine and for Europe as well. Very, very much so for Europe. So I want to thank President Putin for his time and effort with respect to this call and for the release yesterday of Mark Fogel, a wonderful man. This is being spun, or at least trying to be spun as by Trump, that this was some sort of gift that he negotiated this release. No, Mark Fogel was part of a prisoner exchange. Like the Kremlin announced, like the release of Mark Fogel was part of a prisoner exchange. This wasn't a freebie. And it just goes to show you once again, Trump is a transactional person. If you give him something he wants, you can almost ask for whatever you want in return. Which is, again, very worrying indeed, because what he wants is he wants peace at any cost. Doesn't matter what happens to Ukraine, doesn't matter about any future security guarantees, doesn't matter about anything else in the future. He wants peace so that he can go back to America and say, see, I negotiated peace. Doesn't matter what happens with the consequences, doesn't matter what happens on the ground, doesn't matter what happens to the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians that either A, can't return home, won't turn home because it will mean living under Russian occupation, or those Ukrainians who have been living under Russian occupation for the past couple of years. That is incredibly worrying what is going to happen to them. Very worrying indeed. So, a wonderful man agreed last night at the White House. I believe this effort will now lead to a successful conclusion, hopefully soon. Let's not beat around the bush. This is I think, the biggest betrayal, and yeah, let's use that term, the biggest betrayal I think we could have possibly ever seen. And we don't even know what's going to be in that that deal. I mean, we'll probably know as soon as Ukraine knows. But this is a betrayal. The US made guarantees to Ukraine that if it gave up its nukes, we would defend them. And Russia also made guarantees that it would not invade Ukraine or use economic coercion. Both those things Russia has done. We are the only ones in that other Budapest memorandum, because it was us, the UK, or the US, UK, and Russia. One of the things this shows, and we've talked about this before, Ukraine gave up its nukes. This unfortunately shows, in this now incredibly ever dangerous world, if you're a small country and you've got a big neighbor, well, you need nukes. That leads to more nuclear proliferation. That could be very well a direct consequence of this. That makes the world a little bit more dangerous place, because at the moment in Europe, countries that have nukes, there's the UK, there's France, and Russia. And that's it in terms of nuclear powers in Europe. Does Ukraine join that club? Might very well be a consequence of this, and that is worrying. If you want less nuclear weapons, I'm speechless. I generally am. This is the worst case scenario. I haven't felt this bad since I woke up after the morning after the referendum. Like, hearing this news, I have never felt so bad, like even worse than 2016. But it also goes to show you, you can't trust America. You can't trust them with any deals. You can't trust them with any treaties because someone could come along like Trump and just rip it up. America now is proving to be an unreliable, unuseful ally. And that on the world stage is very bad. So, yeah, we'll see what happens next, but it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good.